Good morning, everyone. I'll introduce our panelists as they come out. Just a quick review on the session this morning. We have a few prepared slides that we'll share with you, make those available, and then we'll move into a discussion. If we have time later this morning, I'll open it up to the floor. So if you have some questions that you want to direct to anybody on the panel, you should have a chance later this morning. So this particular session, we're going to look at the implementation of an ONAP-based network automation and service orchestration solution on Microsoft Azure. And I'll introduce Shesh. He's Chief Architect and Network Strategy Officer for SES Networks. Joining Shesh is Oren. He's Head of NFV for Amdocs. Gentlemen, if you want to take a seat. One of the things that we like to look at as an analyst market research firm is major shifts that we see in the industry. Some of the key points around this panel is the move to an ONAP-based deployment on Azure, which both of our panelists will discuss their points of view. The thing that I've noticed as an analyst, being in this industry prior to the inception even of NFV and SDN, is the dialogue with most service providers has shifted. It used to be around network function, virtualization, SDN. Now much more of the discussion and dialogue is around automation. And I think it's a realization from many operators that they need to evaluate not only the services that they're going to deploy to their end customers, but more importantly, how they can do this in much faster cycle times than they've done in the past. It's almost driven by some of the advances that we've seen on the technology front. So if you look at a lot of the hyperscale cloud providers, they're providing these services to their end customer with very little human resources. And there's been almost a religious belief around automating everything that they can in their environment. Service providers are a little behind the curve. There's been some semi-automated functions that have been deployed, but we're not quite there, in the context of hyperscale cloud providers. And so when we look at automation, one of the things that we tend to look at is how do you prepare for services that may be unknown to the target markets that you're selling to. And when I talk about automation, what I'm talking about is a faster cycle time in terms of onboarding network functions, perhaps new technologies that get deployed in your infrastructure, rolling out new services, and then orchestrating that and providing real-time assessment on how those services are operating across the infrastructure for your customers. And these deployments, the times on these deployments need to move from years, which is how we did things as an industry years ago, to deploying this in months. And that's what we really want to talk about today. Some of the data that I have for you is really looking at the market. So if we forecast out to 2025, as an industry, the expenditures will approach $1.68 trillion. This is a combination of OpEx and CapEx. And one of the promising things about automation, and I'm not saying it's easy, is the ability to start to deploy in your infrastructure things like machine learning that take some of the manual processes away from smart craft technicians in your environment and actually drive some changes in the orchestration of services. So we're talking about a market where we can optimize the overall capacity of the infrastructure. Again, comparing it to the hyperscale cloud providers, they've done this. So rather than over-provision the infrastructure, how do you optimize that infrastructure? We're talking about the ability to scale and heal across a much more diverse infrastructure. There's been a lot of conversation this week around the edge and moving a lot of the workloads out of the data center and closer to the edge of the market. This is something that we expect to see over the next few years. A little bit about ONAP, because we will be talking about ONAP. For some of you that may not be familiar, this is an initiative, stands for Open Network Automation Platform, that was the combination of AT&T's architecture and China Mobile's architecture. So bringing the two together, both projects were combined in February of 2017. And now what you're seeing in the marketplace is there are many founding members and contributors to the code, including AT&T, Amdocs, China Mobile, China Telecom, Cisco, Ericsson, et cetera. So it's a more vibrant community. The focus is really in how do we take automation forward and try and create a standards-based approach. One of the things that I'll just mention, in this journey is we don't expect this to be a 3 to 4 year journey. This will be, for many operators, it'll take a decade or longer. So as we move from fixed resources and stranded capacity, as I noted earlier, to one where we can actually move workloads around much faster, deliver the latency that's necessary in the edge of the network for specific industry verticals, there'll be a transition that many operators will go through. And I think Ashesh will share some of his experience both today and how he sees things moving in the future environment of SES Networks. A little bit about the company. There's two divisions. One is the video, the other is the network division. For those of you that are not familiar with SES, they're a communication operator deploying mid-Earth orbit satellites, serving the government market, the fixed data market, and the mobility market. So very large company operating globally, providing services to many customers, and they're doing some innovative things in the marketplace. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Ashesh to discuss some of the implementations and his go-forward strategy.
Thanks. So I'm going to start with a little bit of audience participation here. How many of you are familiar with what's going on the slide? And these are not the tractors that are holding up traffic in The Hague. Show of hands. Okay. This is fiber trenching. It's a company laying down fiber. This one? Cool. Raising a cellular tower. This is how telecommunications companies typically establish their infrastructure. This is how SES does it. We launch satellites, we operate them, to be more accurate. And at the moment, we have a little over 75 satellites that are active, 20 in the middle Earth orbit, much closer to the Earth. More than 50 in the geostationary orbit, both providing high-speed, reliable communication across the globe. We cover about 99% of all the population on the planet. So from that perspective, we have one of the largest reaches of any telecommunication provider in the globe. We are the only multi-orbit constellation operator. We are unique in that we have a mix of extremely high performance, almost fiber-like performance with our MEO satellites, and at the same time, the incredibly high resiliency that comes with geostationary satellites. So in case of inclement weather, earthquakes, storms, those connections stay alive. But not only that, we are now trying to completely change the perception of how satellite operators are viewed in the industry. For too long, we've been viewed as something that's niche, that's used when there's no other connectivity media available or you're very remote. And we've been viewed as something that has been a little bit of a challenging connectivity media to deal with. Our work over the past couple of years has been to completely change that over. We're the first satellite provider to have gained a MEF 2.0 certification over our satellites. So on your Ethernet and IP services, we are going to rock up the same way any other terrestrial provider would. We're also building an intelligent edge infrastructure. We realize that there are some remote locations that are just too far away from the cloud. And there is a need for a certain degree of intelligence on the edge. And just to close, we have superpowers. We have cloud scale reach and performance. And now with the work that we are doing with Microsoft and Amdocs, we are trying to add fast to our superpowers. I'm going to hand it over to Oren.
Thank you. It's hard to beat space rockets in the slides, but I'll try to make that interesting as well. And I just want to provide a brief overview of what we're doing, and then we'll cover the rest through the panel. So basically, we're at the NFV SDN World Congress. What we've actually done with CES, and to be frank, I don't think too many folks at Amdocs were familiar with CES a year ago. Because we were, I think, all as an industry much more focused on the traditional market of either fixed line or mobile operators. But we are applying the principles of both SDN, SD-WAN, and NFV to allow CES to deliver much more agile business services as well as value-added services over a satellite and space connectivity. So if we look at some of the challenges that CES had today, they were facing a pretty proprietary network with the traditional sort of siloed vendor lock-in. Introduction of new services was very, very slow, very complicated. Introduction of new innovation was definitely something that was challenging. Lack of automation, a lot of manual processes and so on. And then for what we've learned, I wouldn't say I became an expert, but I started learning a bit. There is an excess capacity, and I think this is something that is representing the entire telecom industry, that prices of pure connectivity are pretty steadily going down, and it's hard to justify and to build a compelling business case around that. You need to be able to offer value-added services. So this is where, through the introduction of automation, virtualization, software-defined networking, and so on, we're pushing towards introduction of automation. How do we automate as many processes as possible from order delivery all the way to network fulfillment? How do we enhance and how do we allow I like to call, how do we allow service providers to move higher up the value chain and offer not just pure connectivity, but additional value-added services, managed security services, other types of 5G services that allow them to create further revenue sources? And how do we really make this, and going back to what Patrick presented around ONAP, how do we tap into an open ecosystem of innovation that will allow us to constantly add more and more functions? So basically, we started with what we call a pre-integrated platform as a service. We took, and we're going to talk about it later on, a pre-packaged NFV SD-WAN platform, and we deployed that on Azure Cloud. So the amazing thing here is not only does it not require CES to build their own telco cloud for this application, as a global company with a global reach of satellites that can serve many areas, it's much easier to scale out into new regions. Some of the areas we're planning to expand into our self-service portal capabilities, and how do we push more and more functionality into the end user and the end customer, allow them to configure order services on their own and configure services independently. And then the next step and the next natural evolution beyond that was, how do we really offer a digital marketplace with more and more functions that could be onboarded almost independently and be offered to customers. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is exactly leverage ONAP to create that connection between a pretty broad ecosystem of functions, and that is where the business value monetization can come from, and the actual network infrastructure, where it's always a combination of physical network elements, the satellites themselves are still not virtualized, right? We still need to launch them up in the air and provide that physical connectivity, but then to virtualize every other aspect of the network and to run both the orchestration, the network functions, and a lot of value-added services on the public cloud. So this is at a high level what we're doing, and I'm pretty sure you will take it from here as the discussion.
Ashesh, I'll start with you. Can you take us through your decision process in deploying the Amdocs solution on Azure?
Right. So we really started with two fundamental pillars. First is we wanted to deeply understand what our customers do with our connectivity and how we expect that to evolve over a period of time. And the second one was what is the infrastructure that we need to be able to deliver services quickly, right? What we realized was, from the customer perspective, there were two real things. Most of the customer traffic was going to end up in the cloud anyway. So for us to have a way to sync our traffic into a cloud, that was going to be a starting point. The second one is, from an infrastructure perspective, a lot of the market that we serve is fairly mobile. So it's ships, planes, trucks. And as you move across regions, the capacity at our aggregation points fluctuates. Now, in order to be able to predict exactly how those patterns are going to work, we'd have to put down a fair amount of infrastructure on the ground. The easier solution to both those problems was to host a large proportion of our future infrastructure in the cloud so that we can really leverage the elasticity and the cloud core itself for moving traffic across regions on the terrestrial legs. The second aspect was that our customers, now that they are starting to get connected, are seeing their own transformation cycles become shorter and shorter. So as a result, what was a mom and pop shop now is going to be a multi-branch office tomorrow, and it's going to be a large corporation in a few years' time. That required us to be really flexible and really fast in how we roll out new services. For that, we decided that we absolutely needed to be standardized. We needed to automate our entire process across the entire service lifecycle, and we needed orchestration end to end. Now, we found two great partners to establish just this kind of a system with Amdocs and Microsoft. And what was great with Amdocs was that I believe they were one of the people that we talked to who really deeply cared to learn about the nuances of satellite industry. And not just the satellite industry and the connectivity and the challenges it brings from a technology perspective, but also our organization. And I think that as a partnership between Amdocs, Microsoft, and SES, even though it's relatively early times, it's already proving to be quite fruitful for us.
Okay. Just a follow-up for many people in the audience that are in the planning and operations side of the business. How are you changing your organization as you move through more of an automated function for these services, right? You may be getting some resistance. Yeah. How do you deal with that?
It's easily one of the most challenging aspects of this transformation journey, the organizational part. And it's part just the organizational structure. The bigger part, as you mentioned, was you have to kind of reorient your entire thought process to this new world. It's challenging, and that's part of the reason why we chose the first project the way we chose it. It was SD-WAN, which resides on the edges of the network. So it doesn't impact the entire network day zero. It starts with relatively isolated entities. So you start with a small team of people who are impacted by it. And then you bring in a new way of working, DevOps, NetOps. And then you start building on top of that, one after the other. I think that ends up showing early success, and then you can start having a sustained roadmap that transforms your entire organization. Just doing a reorg day zero it's just going to cause pain.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it has to be a journey. It's important that for us it was really important that we recognized that it was going to be multi-year.
Yeah.
It's not just something that you can do in a couple of releases and call it a day.
Yeah, thank you. Arn, I believe, if I'm correct, this is your first deployment on Azure.
Right.
And do you see this as a trend? And give us your perspective on why customers would want to deploy.
First of all, we definitely expect to see this as a trend. It's a journey, as Ashish just mentioned. It needs to fit the right elements in the organization. We've been playing around this for quite some while, and actually SES came to know us through the work we've done with AT&T on demonstrating that ONAP can run on Azure. I think that it truly depends on the type of customer. We will probably see more and more. I think that this platform on Azure will make NFV virtualization automation much more accessible to smaller customers. Mm-hmm. Because if you look at a lot of the tier 2s or tier 3s, whether in North America and in Europe or other regions of the world, if they need to first go through the threshold of building their own telco cloud, that by itself will probably be a barrier. Mm-hmm. Because it's a huge upfront investment. It also requires to reskill the organization to make sure you have the right operational folks that are very different in between running a network and running and operating a data center. And it gives you an amazing starting point and a quick and efficient way to scale out. I think with some other operators, we'll most likely see a hybrid topology because if you already have your own telco cloud, there are also some applications that do have latency requirements, and this is where you need to move into either the edge, and Azure has some capabilities around that with the Azure stack, or into your own telco cloud. There are also regulatory constraints for certain applications. So I don't expect it to be black or white, but I do expect it to be a trend. And I think, as Ashish mentioned, I think he touched on 3 key principles. That first of all, you need to make sure that you offer end-to-end orchestration. And I think, as you've shown in the journey, if you just virtualize assets, you don't truly automate, the operational and the business benefits are quite limited. You need to make sure that the organization is catching up, and you need to do this gradually. And this allows you to take a pragmatic approach, to start with something that has a fairly low risk, fairly low entry point pricing, and then scale it out from there.
Okay. So it seems like the sweet spot is tier 2, tier 3s in terms of your target base, potentially. Can you perhaps give us a view into what you think the adoption rate? I mean, do you have any expected announcements that we should be looking for?
We have. I mean, first of all, we've just announced this week another win actually here. So SES is right across the street here, right? If you walk, it's a 1-minute walk from the World Phone, and we just announced 2 days ago a win at VodafoneZiggo. So I think by now we have the Netherlands covered pretty well. There's maybe one more customer, but we'll hopefully get there as well. There will be further announcements, but it's not just the tier 2s and tier 3s. I think that the tier 2s and tier 3s are now being opened up as an additional addressable market, whereas before that, without the public cloud capabilities, they might have not been accessible. But there are plenty of opportunities that we've announced over the last couple of months, and we will be announcing further around larger tier 1s as well. I think in general, we're seeing this at the event. The market, there's still too many players that are sitting on the fence, unfortunately. And hopefully every additional customer, every additional proof point that we can show as to the operational benefits and the business benefits of NFV would convince further folks to join the wagon or to hop on the wagon.
Shesh, I'm going to come back to you. Just some of the challenges, if you can give us just maybe more clarity on some of the operational issues that you're facing and what Amdocs is actually doing to help you solve some of these challenges. Right.
So, like I mentioned, we have a global coverage across 99% of the population, over 75 satellites, which beam down traffic onto, I believe at the last count, it was 26 teleports across the globe. geographically spread. And at any one of those teleports, it's difficult to predict how the traffic patterns are going to look over a period of time. So we are currently in the position where we still have a manageable scale. So those fluctuations aren't really that large. With the satellites that we are planning to launch in about 18 months' time, our scale is going to go up at least tenfold. And our capacity is going to go up tenfold. And the number of customers that are lined up for that capacity, including the endpoints, are going to go up by the same proportion, if not more. As a result, we clearly see that we are going to hit a problem where, first of all, manually managing the network is just not going to be possible. So the automation part that Amdocs is bringing in, the programmatic way of deploying services, that's going to be critical, the entire lifecycle management of services. The other aspect is it makes it almost critical that we deploy almost the entirety of our core intelligence in the cloud so that we can move it across regions. Even at the get-go, I think within the next 2 years, we are going to have either ONAP, ONAP-powered Amdocs, or one of our SD-WAN or firewall or other controllers spread across at least 5 or 6 different regions across the globe. And the management of that and the coordination between them becomes near impossible if we don't have a good orchestration solution sitting on top of it. And for that sort of scale, that sort of geographic disparity, Amdocs is a clear leader in being able to deliver that sort of service.
Okay. I think we have some time. I want to maybe open up some questions to the audience, either to Oren or Ashesh. Do we have any questions? Okay, we have a gentleman in the middle there. She's got a microphone for you. Hey, just please announce who you are and then direct the question to the appropriate.
Thank you. This is Mehmet Toy from Verizon. So I'm actually curious, given you talk about the MEC and as well as the satellites, so using the MEC. So from a management perspective, are you planning to have let's say, a single orchestrator that does orchestration on the MEC as well as on the satellites, so that you can actually be able to do the configuration and things like that end-to-end, or you have a different strategy for the management?
That's actually a great question, because that kind of falls into another announcement that we made just about a month ago. There is enough idiosyncrasy in the satellite world because of the work that we do on the satellites being on the absolute bleeding edge. It's quite proprietary. So as a result, we are working with another partner, Kythera, on developing a satellite orchestrator that's going to manage the satellite domain. But we also have an access domain, which looks exactly like an access domain for a telecommunication provider. And we have an aggregation and cloud core, which again looks exactly like a telecommunication provider. So for us, the solution was simplified by breaking the network down into these 3 domains: satellite domain, the access domain, and the aggregation and cloud core. And then having a multi-domain orchestrator sitting on top of it, which is where Amdocs comes in.
Right.
So there's a certain level of federation there. But that kind of works well because then we can hide the complexity of the satellite domain itself, and for the end-to-end connectivity, make it look like a layer 1 transport.
So just a really follow-up question. Thanks for the answer. As you know, the protocols are being used on the satellites are quite different than what we do on the terrestrial networks, and I assume that the MEC has to use maybe some IPv4, IPv6 or type of protocols. So how do you, of course, probably you may have a gateway between the MEC and the satellites. so that probably you do the protocol conversion, things like that. But how smooth that transition is, I'm just curious.
So we're kind of transforming the relationships that we have with our satellite vendors, satellite equipment vendors, where the satellite domain is in the future going to deliver an Ethernet connection. It's going to be an e-transit, basically. So you'll have E and I on either side. So that gives you a fairly good flexibility across it. It kind of ends up looking like a submarine cable at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from the audience? Okay. Ashesh, I'll come back to you. Can you give us a perspective about maybe your future services, but also operationally how you plan to either expand the deployment that you have with Amdocs or perhaps with others? So what's next in terms of types of services that you'll be looking to deploy and what you'll be doing from an automation perspective?
Right. So a loaded question. I think on the automation front, it's going to be critical that after SD-WAN, we start picking off other parts of our existing network. So that'll include our IP services, our underlay, our Ethernet services, and getting them onboarded into the system. The next level, I think it came up in the audience question, where we need to then start orchestrating those services across the satellite domain itself. And that's when we get truly end-to-end orchestration across our entire infrastructure. That's all planned activities through the end of 2020, give or take. The real benefit from this transformation, besides just the manageability of the network that we're going to start seeing, that's going to be more along the lines of offering our customers things like self-service or faster onboarding of new VNFs and new capabilities. And that starts making better use of the intelligent edge capabilities that we're going to deploy. So as an organization grows their operations over our connectivity, we need to be able to grow our services with them. And in an ideal world, they don't really reach out to us or talk to us. They just go on the portal and configure it. And that's truly powerful.
Yeah. Most of your business, your core business is still on the transport side, but can you give us perspective like your partner ecosystem and how maybe you can actually drive growth in the business through collaboration with a wider ecosystem of partners? Is that in the future for SES Networks?
So we've always looked at partners as a way of growing our business. We have a fair number of pretty large partnerships, especially in the energy area or in the aerospace. So if you are ever on a plane and you have connectivity through satellite, chances are it's over one of our satellites.
Right.
It doesn't show up as an SES service. We work through our partners. As far as the expansion is concerned, a lot of the announcements that we've made recently with Microsoft kind of start alluding to that. With Microsoft, it truly is, again, a partnership. It's not a vendor-customer relationship. While we are leveraging their platform, we are also giving them access to reach the remote areas of the world and to cover the last few legs of larger corporations that are going through their own digital transformation journeys with Microsoft to make sure they have cloud connectivity and high-speed, reliable access to the edge capabilities that Microsoft deploys with either Azure Stack or the Databox Edge. And I think those kind of relationships, we are going to start seeing them bring more collaboration over a period of time.
Yeah, okay. And I'll just come back to the audience, see if there's any questions in the audience. Okay, let's talk a little bit about standards, where you see standards fitting in, where there may be some gaps. Is that something that is an issue for you, or are you satisfied with the level of support you're getting on the management front, particularly around we're talking about moving to more virtualized functions as we get into newer technologies, and obviously you have things, Yang models and Tosca templates, but your view on where the industry is and maybe where the industry could do better from a standards perspective.
Yeah, so selfishly from SES's perspective, we really see standardization as an opportunity because that helps us connect to our customers and our partners in a more efficient way. Truly, if our goal is to have self-service for our customers, we absolutely need inter-carrier automation. And standardized services on the underlay as well. But at the same time, I think there's always this, I wouldn't necessarily call it conflict, but there is this competition between standardization and innovation.
You need to find the right balance. Yeah.
You need to find the right balance. There's areas where standardization actually drives innovation, as we've seen in ONAP. The MEF LSO standards getting adopted for defining the interfaces for service lifecycle management are another good area. That there's this fairly curious aspect of how two entities will talk. That if that is standardized, then you can actually focus on innovating on the actual core entities that are driving the intelligence. So I think there's a symbiotic relationship between them, but if you try and go out and get the latest and greatest thing off the marketplace, chances are it's going to take a little bit of time for them to adopt the standards.
Exactly as you, Patrick, have shown in your intro slides, we're in a journey right now. If we look at where the market was 2 or 3 years ago, we were not in a good shape, and there was complete lack of standardization, specifically around VNF modeling and interfaces and APIs and so on. And we felt that because the onboarding process of every new VNF was a nightmare, and that sort of kills innovation, and that's sort of, I think, what would slow down adoption. I think we're definitely in a much better place. We need to find, we're constantly emphasizing the pragmatic approach, because if you try to take it to the extreme, right? If you look at ONAP, there's a lot of FUD around ONAP of being heavy and lacks modularity and so on. I think that might have been true 2 years ago. It's definitely not the case today. And people also need to understand that you don't necessarily need to adopt 100% of ONAP. You can pick and choose the right components. It's all about packaging and creating the proper hardened version of it. I think this is where we had a very good starting point, and where we formed a very strong relationship with SES from the onset, because they understood it. They understood that it's not about black or white. It's about, let's understand what works better, what works, what is maybe less advanced today. I think definitely the entire domain around service design and creation and onboarding is where it's critical to adopt the standards and so on. And in other cases, there's plenty of room for innovation from the vendors themselves. So.
Yeah, okay, good. We have a few minutes left. Any questions from the audience? No, so...
no, there is. You have the hero of the day.
Yeah.
So again, this is Mehmet from Verizon. As you know, the space networking is substantially different than what's going on the terrestrial side. And ONAP is built mostly on the terrestrial perspective, and of course the wireless side there too. So what kind of changes that you make in ONAP to really make it adaptable for the space networking?
Actually, to be frank, there weren't too many changes we had to adopt. At the end of the day, connectivity is connectivity. Protocols are we're using the same VNFs, the same SD-WAN controllers. There was some additional work that had to be done around solutioning or architecting the right overall solution and understanding the impact. And you gave the example of Katera, right? That new partner, and that will probably be one of the next functions we onboard, and maybe there is some adaptation needed there because of the abstraction layer. But overall, what was nice is that we could see ONAP fit pretty quickly and pretty seamlessly into a completely different architecture.
Yeah, so from our perspective, I think what we are really trying to do is, instead of trying to adopt all of the standardized networking to satellite industry. We're trying to do the solution the other way around. We're trying to abstract the satellite component with the ARC system
To adapt
we're
to
building,
whatever we
to adapt to the more standardized interfaces and deliver a more common standardized connectivity at the edges of it.
I think my main worry is the satellite location changes, and the things are quite a bit different, routing and everything else in the space. So therefore, once the node changes, I'm curious, how do you deal with the ONAP side? There certainly you talk about abstraction, but I really don't know how that abstraction is going to work out.
Yeah, there are ways to model it. I think, by the way, what you've mentioned is right. I'm not sure we have neither the time nor is this the right. We can take it offline, but I think that the dynamic nature of the satellite industry and the fact that there are handoffs in between satellites and so on just further emphasizes the need for automation.
Yeah, right.
Okay, because
Yeah.
if you try to do a lot of these things manually, you're even further limited.
Thank you for your questions. Final thoughts, Arun, as we wrap up?
Yeah, I think it's just a general sense, and I think I sort of, one way or another, I convey the same message every year at this event. I think people, in general, the industry and specifically service providers need to get off the fence. I think virtualization and NFV and automation orchestration are here. There are plenty of proof points, and I think there are plenty of pragmatic ways to start implementing this today.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
just
it?
to add on top of what Arun just mentioned, for us, we had a significant challenge trying to get ourselves to accept that this is the way forward. But once we started going down this journey, it's been truly transformational for us because it completely changes the dynamics of how we plan our network, our expected investments in actual assets on the ground. Are going to be significantly lower over the next 5 years compared to what we spent over the past 5 years, even though we are going to deliver way more customers, way more connectivity.
Right. Yeah.
And that's incredibly helpful when we have to spend a fair amount of assets launching our satellites into space.
Right. Great. Gentlemen, thank you very much. For those of you that have been shy, if you want to come up afterwards and discuss any questions you have, we welcome that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.